All right, welcome everyone who's joining. Very excited to bring you today's event, Reimagining AEC Project Collaboration to Maximize Profits. So this is going to be a unique panel discussion where we're going to be hearing insights from some of our esteemed guests today. And we're also going to be taking a lot of polls and a lot of engagement from the audience. So please stay tuned throughout today's event for the polls that we'll be launching and participate in those. And feel free to use the chat and the Q&A freely to ask questions or to share thoughts and insights on any of the topics that we're covering today. Right, I'm going to take care of a few housekeeping items. So first is I'm going to share a form in the chat right now with everyone. This is our AIA sign-in form. I'll share that again at the end of today's webinar in case anyone misses it. Just make sure at some point during today that you throw your AIA number in there so that we have your updated information. Your attendance will be reported directly to the AIA and certificates will be provided. Please allow for some time for that to show up into your account and for the certificates to be delivered. And we're going to start off today with some quick introductions of today's speakers. And then I'll review our learning objectives. We're going to try to keep slide reading to a minimum, but we'll also have a recording of today's event for anyone who wants to dig into these slides a little bit more afterwards. I'll start off with myself. So I'm Bo. I'm going to be moderating today's event. I am the current Director of Growth and Architectural Relations at Acelab, and I'm also a former architectural designer. So super excited to be here today and for everyone to hear the amazing insights that we have. And next, we're going to start off with one of our first speakers, Steve Burns. So Steve, feel free to give a few minutes introduction yourself.
Oh, sure, Bo. My name's Steve Burns. I'm an architect. I recently transformed my career to consulting. I had previously spent the last 15 years at BQE Software, which we'll probably hear more about in a bit. Before that, I had my own firm, architectural firm in Chicago, which I founded in 1993. And prior to that, I worked for SOM for 7 years in Chicago, London. Later, I opened an office for SOM in Berlin for a couple of years between 1991 and 93. Right now, I'm consulting for the welldesignedfirm.com. I launched that in February. It's basically a technology-focused consultancy helping firms really design an office that's really as well considered as the projects that they provide their clients.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
All right. Next up, we have Dave Lemont.
Thanks, Bo. Nice to meet everyone today. My background is running venture-backed startup companies. I've run 5 different companies. I'm afraid to say over the last 30 years. And I'm probably best known for being the CEO of Revit, which I had the honor and privilege of being the CEO there for 5 years. And then we merged the company with Autodesk, as everyone's probably aware. And I spent a year at Autodesk as a general manager of the division that was responsible for the Revit business. I've also been on the board of Newforma, which is another company in this space. I'm currently an advisor to Hiarc, which is an exciting company, sort of changing the way homes are going to be built and sold for us. And I'm currently the executive chairman of Acelab, and very excited about that because I had the opportunity at Revit to see how the world can change in the way we design and document buildings. And I think Acelab has a unique opportunity to help the world of architecture improve the way buildings are specified, products are selected, and the entire workflow around that, bringing real innovation into choosing the best possible products for every single project. So another exciting area in one of my true loves, which is building and architecture.
Awesome. All right. And finally, we have Andre Baros. Andre?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andre Baros. I'm a practicing architect and have been practicing for 26 years. I started the first 15 years of my career in Chicago, working at a range of firms. First, Harry Weiss, where I got to dip my toes into transit and a bunch of large buildings in Chicago. Then 10 years at Wheeler Kearns, where I got to do just about everything. It's sort of a laboratory think tank for architecture. A couple of years at HOK, and then moved to Denver, where I worked for a commercial firm, SAR, local firm, doing mixed use and commercial projects. And then most recently was at Storybuilt, which is a vertically integrated development company, where I got to see architecture from a bunch of new angles, practicing as their lead for the Denver office. And I think a common thread through my whole career has been two things: materiality and technology. So I feel like I've been in the trenches of all the conversations we're having here today, implementing different platforms at every place, being one of the first 5 Revit users in Chicago back in the early 2000s, and kind of seeing all these changes firsthand, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
All right, thank you, everyone. So just to quickly review here today's learning objectives, we're going to be talking about improving collaboration and streamlining workflows through the use of new technologies with the overall goal to maximize your profits and improve your collaboration. And we're going to be focusing on knowledge sharing. So again, feel free to use the chat and the Q&A. We're going to leave some time at the end to be able to take some questions from the audience, and stay tuned for our polls throughout the webinar. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and launch our first discussion question poll. So please take a time to answer that. I'll share our results once we've gotten a good amount of answers. So our first discussion question is, do you feel that you could do your job better with more transparency into your firm's processes and profitability? So to start out, I'd love to hear maybe from Andre, in your experience as an architect. Yeah, do you feel that you have had some times where you've had more transparency into firm processes and that's helped your overall work? Or on the flip hand, other times where you felt like there hasn't been a lot of transparency and that has been really impactful to your ability to design well?
Sure. I guess the neat thing about being at such a diverse range of firms is I've seen it all. And one of the things is that when you're at a firm with a high degree of transparency, it's often not even talked about. It's just the way things happen. And actually, in firms with a lack of transparency, it becomes a distracting conversation because you always want to know what you don't know, right? When you have the data at your fingertips, you know whether it's useful or not. When you don't know, you start to question and second guess, and it can become a real disruption to the flow within the firm and teams.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end our poll. We've gotten a good amount of responses. So I'll share these results. As predicted, most people said yes. But for the folks who said no, I'd love to hear from you why you said no. So feel free to chime in the chat if you've got any reasons there. And Dave and Steve, anything to add from your end in terms of transparency and how that can help impact designers' work and architects' work?
Maybe I'll just jump in here, but in my experience, when asking a firm owner about helping their staff improve performance and efficiency, they'll generally look at internal processes and they're going to look at their software tools, which is great, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. So there's efficiency, consistency, there's quality, and I think we'll talk about collaboration a little bit. They're quickly addressed through some improved tools, but it really leaves out something which is really professional growth and job satisfaction, which are actually key drivers for employee retention and for a firm's long-term success. So in my world, I think transparency is like a magic wand. When every member of your team understands what are the KPIs, which are key performance indicators, if they understand what are those KPIs that are meaningful to the firm owners, they actually understand what they mean and where those KPIs at all times. Only when they know that can they become these active participants in ensuring that the firm's goals are going to be met. So I'd like people to think that, remember, you are a team, but you're a team in business. Some of you are owners, some are coaches, some are captains, but everybody is a player, and you need to know where you are going at all times, what's your strategy, and just why you're playing the game. So software tools are like half the equation, but transparency is really the half that balances it.
Stephen, a question for you. Have you seen the behavior of young architects change as firms became more transparent in their business objectives?
Yeah, well, I provide so many webinars, and I do hear young people who are hankering to understand this because it's not taught in school. They don't understand business. They can design themselves out of any problem, but they don't know what's going on in the company, what's important, or how to run a business whatsoever. So when you teach people about the business that they're in, not just how to design and deliver a project, it opens up a world of possibilities. Just like the more you understand, like Andre's talking about, the more you understand about materials, the more you understand about construction techniques, you become better as serving your clients. So you will become better in the long term as being a good architect, serving both your firm and your client when you know about what it takes to run a company.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Any last thoughts before we move on?
I just thought there was one good question in the comments about the relationship between process and profitability and understanding both, that sometimes they're intertwined, but sometimes they really are two separate things. On that spectrum of transparency, I've seen more firms that are fully transparent on process, but not necessarily profitability. And I think, to reinforce Steve's point, you really need transparency on everything for it to be effective and to understand what the common goals are.
Yeah, Andre, just to keep this going for another minute, if I can, I have heard firm owners push back on sharing profitability information because they're afraid it will either make their employees concerned about the health of a company when they start seeing projects aren't performing well. So they're going to worry, am I going to be laid off? Or they're going to see how incredibly profitable something is and wonder, why am I not being appropriately compensated? So it's a great discussion for another time. I have one firm that I've worked with who shares absolutely everything. Even the salaries of every personnel are known by everybody, including the principal. So everybody's full compensation package is known, which is total transparency, all the way to some of the other extremes, which I think, Andre, you've probably seen at some of the places you've worked at, where you just are given blinders and told, do your work.
Right. Right.
I'll give an interesting point. Obviously, a majority of my career has been spent in technology, but in venture-backed startups, these are generally very small companies that are by design not making money for most of their history and investing ahead of profitability. And so I found that you really need to give people that, when people understand the reality and we trust them, that they really can contribute in a much more profound way when they understand the mission and how critical their role is. So not being scared to tell people the truth about financials can generally garner more effective people in the workforce, I found.
And also, just to answer one of the other questions in there about firm scale, I don't have experience on every type of firm, but ironically, the smallest firms I've been at have been the most transparent. The largest have been sort of half and half. And it's the mid-sized firms that I think struggle the most with how much to communicate or not, and have the most anxiety around sharing.
All right, we're going to move forward. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so now we're going to dig in a little bit deeper to the specification and the product research process and talk about streamlining and bringing transparency to those workflows. So this is a little diagram showing how these processes can often be really disjointed with very little transparency. And without centralized ways to store and share information, the process of identifying the right spec can be overwhelming and cost you valuable time. So some ways to combat that include adapting technologies to enable things like easy collaboration and shared file resources, and also using technology to streamline your project management and your specification workflows to help you stay on top of unplanned changes and help your projects stay on budget, which overall will impact your firm's profitability. All right, so I'm going to launch our next discussion question. So this one is, how effective is your firm at having standards and enforcing them on a project-to-project basis? And I'll give folks a few moments to answer before we share the results so that we can talk about those as well. But let's see, it looks like we've got a good amount of folks saying that their standards are well documented and easily accessible, which is great. But we also have a lot of people saying that they're hard to find and that they have multiple impeding standards, So that was a question I was curious about, handling multiple impeding standards. So even if they are accessible, they could be not necessarily organized or kept up to date. And I know that this is definitely a struggle in a lot of architecture firms I've worked in the past. And a few people answering in my dreams. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll now and share our results so that we can talk through them. All right, let's see. So a lot of folks said that the standards are easily accessible and well documented, which is great to hear. I'd love to hear from anyone who answered that way, what it looks like, what your current kind of resources look like to keep those standards well documented and accessible. So feel free to chime in the chat with those insights. And yeah, I'll turn it over to our speakers now to see if there are any thoughts that you guys have around this question.
Well, I have a thought about it, and that is that there is, I think there is a push and pull around this entire topic of standards in a firm, in that on the one hand, standardization allows us to move quickly and rely on things that we know have worked well in the past and removes risk. On the other hand, there is so much innovation going on in the world today around sustainability, energy efficiency, recyclable products, recyclable materials, and to only rely on standards and not being on top of that innovation, which can make a huge difference to the value that we bring to clients, is something that I think has to be balanced in every firm.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay.
So I think one of the things I've observed over the years is that sometimes the difference between a good project and a great project is not intention or design skill, but just running out of time, right? You just hit the deadline before you got to the project to where you wanted to go. And to a large degree, standards should be a tool to help you get to that finish line in the time you have, right? Like, yes, some offices can just get more time or get a bigger budget and put more people on it. But very often your only recourse to deliver a project of the quality you want is to just have a more efficient process so that you can deliver the quality you're after within the time allotted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll just chime in here because, Dave brings up a really interesting point, which is it could stifle innovation or the new products that are really important. But I would break this idea of standardization into two hemispheres. So there's this part on the deliverables. So what your client actually hires you to produce for them. And then there's the management side of that. So in my experience, most firms have some kind of standard. What is it? It's like 28% of you say they're really greatly done standards. But that comes to the production of design and the drawings. Things like sheet indexes, numbering systems, notations, specifications, those kinds of things are standardized in many firms. And in addition, a lot of firms just have these CAD library, of standard detail. So they'll open up a template for a CAD or BIM file, and it's already preloaded with a bunch of standards. And every project has some unique things. Overall, they never really vary from the standards. But on the other hand, very few firms have similarly well thought out standards for how a project's to be managed. And for Dave's point earlier, you could actually always designate a time and dollar amount towards R&D if you'd like. But what I see is like it's the Wild West for project managers who kind of bring their own game into every project, which is a reason why I think technology, like, from at least from BQE, I know comes out of the box with standards for how you manage a business and how you manage a project, and those can be tweaked because every firm does have their own spin on how they really want to operate. But when a PM starts up a new project in the management software, there's already standard, checklist systems, and that could include, obvious things like, doing the zoning and code analysis, but also let's take a look at what's available right now, because this client of ours is very interested in, sustainable or green technologies, and therefore we want to know what's out there this period. And so we're going to spend 2 days on R&D, that kind of a thing. So I'd just like people to think of standards for a firm, not just being in the deliverables, but think about the standards that you use for managing the firm, and more specifically managing the projects.
Mm-hmm.
I think one other point, Bo, is that, standards is not a slice in time that's static. And so the question is, how do standards evolve? Every project is a learning experience. Every use of new products is a learning experience. This product worked well, but this one was hard to install. This one failed. The reps were very responsive from this manufacturer in helping me. How do we capture that information into our standards libraries so that we can continue to learn and grow from the information that occurs in every project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point.
I'd love to know if you had a survey question for people on how many actually conduct a post-construction evaluation of their projects to really look at how are things holding up, especially with regard to new materials, and then bring back their findings back into the firm to update their standards.
Yeah.
Of the 5 firms I've worked at, I saw one that was really good at saying this: every project follows the standards. You start there, but then afterward you assess, where did you deviate, and was it because of a project specific requirement, or is it because you found something better and we need to update our standards? And the standards were a living document. Every time a project closed out, that standard was updated, maybe only a little bit, but it was a fully living document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that term as like a living document. I think that that's really important.
Yeah.
We have a comment on that post-construction question from Steve. Somebody says, post-construction debriefs are great. We do them and we use Core to track the tasks. So that's very cool. Love to hear that. All right. Any last thoughts from our speakers, or shall we move on?
I guess one question I have is, how are people managing libraries of materials as you're becoming more distributed, but and not necessarily in person 100% of the time? Do you have resources to let people find things from wherever they are across multiple offices, time zones, places?
Yeah, that's a good question. Feel free to chime in the chat if anybody has experience building out more of a library that works for this kind of new digital or remote working age. Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on to our next few slides. All right, so just to reiterate, this chart coming from AIA shows that a strong specification management process and real-time project insights are key to meeting client needs and keeping projects on track, which ultimately improves the profitability of your firm. And when it comes to specification management, this is something that has been lacking in innovation historically, but luckily there are tons of tools out there today that can already help you to streamline these processes of your firm. All right, so we're going to launch into our next discussion question, which is, how do you typically do your materials research? All right, and I'll give folks a few moments to answer before we open this up to the audience. I'm already seeing a lot of results for search online or internet search tools. And a lot of responses for talking to a sales rep or a vendor or supplier. So that's great. Those are really important resources. Okay, I'm going to give everyone maybe like 30 more seconds. Looks like we've had about half people respond. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll and share our results. Okay, so a lot of folks saying search online and using internet tools. Not many folks saying use AI tools. And a lot of talking to experts or talking to a sales rep or vendor. But not a lot of using firm standards and not doing the research, which is interesting. Right. So let's see. I'm curious for folks who talk to sales reps and vendors and suppliers, if you have any insights on how you're managing and keeping track of all of those contacts. So that's something that in firms in the past, I know there has been a little bit of disjointedness in my experience of figuring out who the right person to get in touch with is, or figuring out who your coworker from 3 years ago was contacting at a specific manufacturer. And in my experience, I wasn't working at a lot of firms that had like really healthy CRMs or systems for kind of managing contacts internally. So yeah, I'd love to hear from folks who are using that sales rep or vendor supplier contact, how you're managing that and how you're making sure you're getting the information you need from the right person. Okay, a lot of people in the chat saying semi-annual lunch and learns to bring us new materials. Those are always great. Spreadsheets, we hear a lot of, so we have someone keeping a spreadsheet with contacts. Some people using databases. Some people saying the principal has the responsibility to keep up with all of this. So it's really not on a lot of the designers. And somebody here asked, which I'd love to touch on a little bit, how AI can be used for materials research. So that is something that's definitely, I would say, part of some newer emerging technologies. But I think interesting, even now, you know, with the tools that we have in terms of like ChatGPT or Bard, I'm curious to hear if anyone has tried out using a tool like that instead of using the typical kind of Google search, and if there were different results or if that has helped you at all in your workflows.
Well, the nice thing about Bard, of course, it's Google, but it has a Google search button in the findings. So when it gives you back data, you can actually start seeing what are the underlying URLs for those materials, which I don't think, unless someone's got a plugin they've found out, can work with ChatGPT at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone says they've used ChatGPT for roofing membranes and it's actually been quite helpful. That's cool.
You know, one of the points I think about research is there are so many different product categories and product types in a building that, you know, I empathize with the challenge for architects to actually be experts in all these areas. And so, and I think that often the problem is, to get the right answer, you have to know the right question to ask, or more than the right question, the right series of questions to ask that will really help you narrow down the right solution for the specific project problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's really where, you know, sort of, you know, Google search implies that you know pretty much what you're looking for, which can be the case many times, but in other cases, you just may not exactly know what you're looking for and you need help.
I'm very fond of using ChatGPT to ask it to create prompts for me for Bard, just as a thought for people, because chat, again, its LLM is like ends at what is it? I don't know, 2021 or something like that. So Bard's better, but chat does a really nice job of providing, if you lay out the full history of what you're trying to do, very descriptive about it, and ask it for a prompt for prompts, you learn a lot by asking it, how would you prompt?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there are three aspects to this whole material research problem. One is, you know, researching, you know, looking, but the other is collaborating with the right people that have information that you can't just get from the search. And then the third is, how are you going to store all this information in an organized way, not only for yourself, but again, back to the whole standards capability, so that it's in some standard sort of a directory or library in a digital standpoint that other people can take advantage of what you learn through your research on an ongoing basis. And it's the combination of these three things that, you know, is part of the critical workflow of getting material research to be effective for the firm.
Yeah, great. I think that's actually a great comment to lead into our next slides with. So here's just a quick snapshot of some resources for reliable and transparent building product information. So this is a great way to start to get some of that expert advice. But to Dave's point, this is really, you know, kind of a three-pronged process. So it's about getting that expert advice, but then it's also about where do I store it and how do I share it? So yeah, even more than just finding reliable information, We need to be able to track our project management process, keep on top of our changes to specs, and have that information be really transparent for other folks in our firms. All right, so for our next discussion question, do you feel that your firm is set to handle unexpected changes in product availability, budget, and scope? So I'm going to go ahead and launch that now. See, it's not letting me launch. Oh, there we go. Had to stop sharing. All right, now I'm going to launch it. So this is just a yes or no question. So feel free to chime in again in the chat with any additional thoughts that you have around this. If you're answering yes, what is it about your firm that makes you feel confident that you're set to handle these changes? And if you're answering no, is there anything that is specific about that makes you feel like you're really not set to handle those changes? Or is there a past experience that's happened where an unexpected change has caused some difficulty in your project or in your workflow process? And I'd love to hear maybe from Andre again with this one. In your experience on the architecture side, would you say that most of the firms that you've worked at have felt like they're set to handle these changes? Or is there like a difference in kind of the small, medium, large firm size and how folks are organized in terms of being able to manage and handle changes in terms of these aspects?
It's funny that I think this is actually the change management is probably the weakest point, even for the best run libraries and resource banks. That when these things happen, it actually comes down to relationships as the number one driver, not standards, right? So the reps, the senior people in the firm who've been through these battles before, and the reps who kind of know behind the scenes what's happening, become really critical to managing that change, because it is a departure from your standards. And so I think it also points to like the complexity of this, that it's really a human issue, not just a tech issue, depending where you are on the process. And the tech component is knowing how to reach the person you need to reach.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, the results here, 68% said yes, which is great.
I also think that, sort of the macroeconomic conditions in the world, pretty much make this a daily occurrence now. There are so many projects that, may have been conceived when interest rates were lower and material costs were somewhat lower. And so now what was going to be affordable or in budget is now out of budget for a project. And, so I think there's more pressure early on architectural firms to think really hard and long about the cost before we get to the end. And now we're scrambling to value engineer some of the best ideas away. And the other thing is there's still so many supply chain delays out there that, you can spec the right product that is going to do the job, but you can't get it to the site on time to begin construction, which is going to hurt the schedule. And so now you've got to find an alternative. And I think this is really happening a lot out there, and it falls on the architect to try to solve these problems.
Yeah. Steve, I saw you laughing and shaking your head earlier. Do you want to share what that was about?
Oh, yeah. I could act like the guy who just walked into the room and didn't understand the context of the question, but I definitely appreciate what Dave and Andre were just talking about, because this is related to, it really comes back to the specifications in the product, and it comes back to the deliverable. But I look at that and I see the words budget and scope, and I tell you, of the thousands of firms I've dealt with over my career right now, I'm looking at firms who, here we say 68% of them say, yes, they got a handle on it. They probably have a handle on it when it comes to those, but it doesn't have a handle on the budget and the scope within their own firm and the project they're doing. So if you'll give me just a moment here, this is what I know. I know when lucky, a firm's going to actually create a bona fide project budget. And in most cases, it's not going to be very detailed. I'll see something like there'll be a set of a number of hours and a number of dollars that they're going to allocate for every phase of their project. And then after that, they leave it again to that PM to decide how they're going to spend that kind of time and money. But if a firm doesn't have a work breakdown structure, the WBS, meaning they have a plan for how they're going to eat the proverbial elephant, right? One bite at a time. They actually play a very dangerous game with how they're going to provide the service to their client. If the firm doesn't have a clear definition of the scope of the project, and if they don't translate that into a clearly defined budget, and if they don't share that detailed budget with the team, and if they don't monitor that budget on a weekly or a fortnightly basis, they will not be able to spot any scope creep that might come around and address it before it gets out of hand. So yes, I understand it when it comes to the products and the supply chain and the costs of things are going up and how it impacts your client. But I look back at that and say, firms might do a very good job serving their clients. At least 68% of you think you do. But I would say it's the inverse when it comes to serving your own firm, that 68% of you are not doing a good job managing the scope creep of your clients when they start adding little things to the project and your fees aren't being changed, or the budget that you've been planning to spend those fees on is just going going crazy because you're spending way more time trying to chase after a way to save your client some money, probably in an impossible way, but you're not going to benefit from that. So there's a whole discussion you can have on that. But I know the general intention here was probably about materials, products in the building.
Well, it probably was, but I bet you a lot of those answers are, yeah, we can handle it because we just spend extra time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And eat it.
Yeah.
They eat it. Yeah. It's
Well,
it's like that problem when firms have a fee based on the percentage of the cost of construction, and they're trying to spend more time to drive down the construction price and keep it in the budget, but it's going to take more work on their part to keep the price low, the construction costs low. And then they will, basically the knock-on effect of that is they're going to make lower fees by spending more time. So interesting conundrum.
I see a lot of comments of some folks that work in design build, or they've been on the contractor side. And, I think a big issue here is, are the firm's attitudes, one, maybe, but secondly, their systems and their data set up for collaboration? Because, if we have product availability or budget scope issues, it isn't just something that can only be solved by the architect. The architect may take the lead, but the contractor subs, manufacturers, they have to be involved in these discussions, and you've got to have good vehicles to share the information in a timely fashion, so people are, dealing with the same information in a timely way.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think this is actually a great transition into our next few questions, which are more focused on profitability. So first, I just want to share this slide. This is a little comparison from architects versus contractors. And the overall insight we want to make here is that architects often want to have less of a cost first mindset, which I think is kind of what we saw in that last question. There's more of a willingness to spend more time, to let scope creep kind of eat away at your firm's profitability, and to, have less billable time. But they do want to be part of actively collaborating teams, and collaboration is really important. So luckily, these two things really go hand in hand. Improving your project collaboration definitely has a direct impact on improving your project profitability and your overall transparency at your firm. So launching into our next discussion question, how do you know if your project is profitable? Right, so again, we're going to give folks a few moments to answer.
While that's getting answered, I was going to answer the question that popped up in the chat about scope creep.
Yeah.
Scope creep is the idea that you have a fee for a project based on a specific scope of work and deliverables. And scope creep is when the amount of work you're supposed to be doing grows, but the fee or contract doesn't grow with it.
Yeah, Larry adds, or client keeps adding stuff to the project, which can also totally happen. All right, I'm gonna give everyone about 30 more seconds, so get your answer in now. Someone else says, lots of that going on at my firm. It happens all the time. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end our poll and we'll share these results. So a lot of folks saying that they use a project management software, which is great. Spreadsheets that are updated by the office, or we just work on projects and we don't have insight into profitability. So 18% said that as well, which I think is also pretty common.
That's
actually better stats than I expected.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
I would thought baseline is 25% at any survey I've given running the firm on spreadsheets. So this is a better group today.
Yeah, everyone pat yourselves on the back. Oh, someone says they wanted to select both project management software and spreadsheets. The problem becomes when they don't align, which is a great point. Yeah, having multiple places to track things can be a huge problem. And having spreadsheets that aren't integrated into your project management software, don't get updated automatically. Yeah, I've seen that happening a lot. So I think that is really true. The ability to answer both of those is definitely important. So thank you, Emily, for adding that comment in.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem when you're doing both. You don't have that single source of truth, so you don't know what to rely on. Mm-hmm. This is why I always push for that single source of truth, but you just need to manage that one thing. Spreadsheets don't get managed in real time, and they are wonderful, but they're also horrible. I mean, they are prone to error. Calculation errors is the most common thing you'll see in it when people insert a new row somewhere for something and their formulas weren't set up properly to include the new insertion, and they'll never realize that, which is why the database way to go is the way to go, because you don't have the you don't have the ability to get in the back there and start mucking about with calculations. It's always going to be, if the data's in and the data's right, your results are going to be right.
Right.
I think the single source of truth comment really resonates for me. And having integration, I think the problem is that fidelity is lost in between information systems. Mm-hmm. It's the old story. If I tell you something and you tell it to Andre and Andre tells it to Bo and Bo tells it to someone else, it's going to be different by the end. And that's what happens with information systems. There's a loss of fidelity, and and then the best decisions aren't made.
In a case like that, you blame it on Andre.
Or whoever you heard it from last, which I guess might be me.
I think one of the key things to talk about here is the implementation of these systems, right? The dream solution is you started day one with a platform and it's grown organically with the system. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of firms, that organic growth happened with 12 different spreadsheets, right? And so that's what everyone was familiar with. And the switch from a pile of spreadsheets to a single source of truth takes a lot of commitment from everyone involved, right? Every stakeholder, back to that transparency idea, everyone has to buy in and engage in not falling back to their old method because they're running out of time, and being diligent about it. I've seen, sadly, huge investments in platforms go to waste, right? Because people spent the money expecting a silver bullet, and you really have to then follow through and implement it. And again, get everybody into it. And then you move forward with that, great new tool. But don't undervalue the champions required in the office, boots on the ground, to get those things to happen.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Any last thoughts before we move on? Okay, cool. All right. So here, just sharing a few insights on the top 10 factors that could be impacting profitability in 2024. So staff shortages, delayed, stalled, or canceled jobs, staff compensation, extended project schedules, A lot of the things that we've been talking about today, I think, are referenced here. And this is going to be our last discussion question of today before we open it up to some audience Q&A. So I will go ahead and launch that in one moment. Okay. All right. So for this one, what do you think would increase the profitability of the firm?
Is this a multi-select, or is this, they can only choose one? Oh, it's only one. Okay.
Only one, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to hear people tell you.
Yeah, I want to select multiple. But yeah, pick whichever one you think would, I guess, be most impactful.
I like the last one.
Yeah. Can't wait to see what people think about that.
Yeah, it is getting a few responses. I'll give everyone a few more minutes before we share these results. A lot of folks are saying regularly evaluating the budget versus actual. And I saw someone in the comments earlier say that they are working for a firm where they have a younger staff, and it's really important to be completely transparent in terms of the budget and profitability, and that they make it a point to discuss that on a weekly basis. So I thought that was really cool to be able to kind of check in on about that on a weekly basis. I think is, yeah, a really great setup, and especially for younger architects, younger people in the firm, to be able to learn from some of the older folks at the firm who have been, you know, handling the business management side of things more. I think that that's a really great setup that you guys have. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll and share the results. So a lot of folks said regularly evaluating the budget, team communication, less responses for implementing project accounting software, which I think is interesting. And a few people said keep the principals away.
I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'd like to broaden this maybe. Certainly planning and monitoring, as 57% say, is essential. But I'd like to say stop waste is probably the easiest win to increase profitability. And that is best handled through pre-design, where most firms don't engage in pre-design, but that's where all team members, you know, the client, the consultants, even the builder, you know, the design team, everybody gets in early, and then they get this absolutely clear understanding of the budget and the scope, the intentions of the client, and all these other kinds of requirements from the owner. And then they could stop wasting, let's say, for example, schematic design hours, pursuing schemes that just won't fly. They just end up in the trash bin, scheme after scheme, having this fantasy of designers of breaking out way beyond what's going to be acceptable to the clients. So I just say that's one example, but be efficient at every stage of your project. And it's just like, how do you, you know, from a business standpoint, you know, reduce your expenses is going to be an easy win to getting, becoming more profitable. And I'd say, you know, reduce the expense of waste that you have in delivering the project.
Mm-hmm. Andre, did you have something you wanted to include?
I was going to say that at the most profitable firm, well, maybe not most profitable, at one of the firms I worked at, a system that worked incredibly well was every month, everyone had to actually initial that they reviewed, everybody, 100% of the staff had to initial that they reviewed the finances for their projects, right? It wasn't just a matter of transparency, but it was accountability tied to that, right? Take a look and confirm you understand what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's impressive, considering you can barely get people to complete a time card on a weekly basis. To actually get them to sit down and focus on that is quite an accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. To go back to an earlier point, and I know this is, you know, much easier said than done, but if people understand the profitability of a project, of the business, everyone is going to contribute more effectively to making it more profitable the next time. If people don't have that information, then they're not armed with what they need to do to meet the mission. So I think it's this transparency issue we talked about at the very beginning of, which means systems need to be in place to understand the profitability, and then sharing that information with people. Then, empowered people can do wonderful things if they really understand what's expected of them.
Well, David, Andre, I think I might have mentioned this to you before, but when I was at SOM and I was very young, I was like 1 year in at that point, after grad school, and nobody stopped by to visit me for a couple of weeks. I was given something to work on. It was a large project, and I just was having the finest time just designing, just doing the work, and I think that you can get away with that maybe on the scale of projects that they were doing, but for most firms and small and mid-sized firms, they shouldn't have that luxury. But if your employee does not know the repercussions of what they're sitting around wasting, or spending 40 hours a week doing, they don't know that, they're just going to be happy doing things that don't contribute to the bottom line in the firm. So I probably wouldn't have just sat there continuing to create elevation option after elevation option on this project if somebody was paying attention to me.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to add is because transparency seems to become a theme for today, is transparency between the broader team as well, between the architecture team and the consultants, between the consultants and the ownership group. I've seen more projects tank because of poor communication about budget between the client, the architect, and the builder than anything else, right? That you hit that moment of truth, the numbers come back from the contractor, and the mysterious budget that was never shared doesn't align. Yeah. It's one way or another, it's actually a common fault of transparency in the overall process. And going back to that initial kickoff meeting, right? It's really nice to have that transparency that includes numbers from day one. And targets and goals, including not just design goals, but as pointed out in the chat, social goals, right? It's the whole picture, and you got to say it out loud, put it in writing. These are the intentions, right? Before you send an intern to draw 50 elevations, tell them what the intention is.
Mm-hmm. All right, awesome. Any other last thoughts to share here before we move on and try to get to some Q&A? Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to go quickly through these next slides, but just want to mention that these are from the AIA's Architectural Billings Report. So a great place to look for some kind of high-level insights in terms of firm profitability and the overall industry. And then lastly, just want to finish on this slide here, again, from those same reports, really just highlighting that firm morale, culture, and staff quality are hugely important factors in improving your profitability. So helping your team to streamline processes, collaborate more efficiently, have transparency into the processes of the firm. These can all really help your firm to aid you in your profitability and also make your employees, happier and I think more able and equipped to do their jobs. So just wanted to leave off on that thought. And then with that, I'll launch one more poll. So this is for anyone who might be interested in learning more about Acelab or BQE Core. So Acelab provides free non-sponsored product research. It is completely free for architects and specifiers to use. You can reach out and respond on this poll if you'd like either a product demo or to speak with a product specialist. So we also provide one-on-one product research support. Andre and myself are some of the folks on that team who provide product research support for architects. You can use our platform to reach out to us anytime, and we're happy to help you with whatever you may need in terms of product research. So whether that's finding more sustainable products, subbing out a product really quickly because there's been a change, something isn't available, you need something with a shorter lead time. We work with all sorts of problems and all sorts of architects. So please feel free to reach out to us for any of those needs. And Steve, do you want to give a little about BQE Core? And then we will hopefully have a few minutes for some of the questions I see popping up in the Q&A.
No, yeah, sure. Thank you. I would just say, stop what you're doing right now when it goes to the part 2 of that and just say, yes, I'd like a product demo. Forget all those other options down there. My mission, and I don't care whether you go to the welldesignedfirm.com, or not, but my mission is really to give you resources and knowledge to build profitable, sustainable, and most importantly, based on that previous discussion, really satisfying business. And I do want everybody who's attending today, just let BQE know that you want a demo. I think I mentioned a couple of times the power of technology. I don't know of any other software vendor that's in the AE space dealing with project and business management that invests so much into building state-of-the-art tools to help firms of every size. So from sole proprietors right up to hundreds of employees manage their businesses and their projects. If you don't know what Core is, BQE Core, it's all-in-one platform, including time. With the most essential thing is time tracking. I know most people don't think it's important, but if you learn why you do it, not for billing, it's incredibly important. Time tracking, expense tracking, invoicing, turning all that stuff into the money, project management, resource allocation, CR, client relationship management, business and project accounting. Those are two very different things, human resources and reporting. So the business intelligence and the automation tools are undoubtedly the finest that are available anywhere. So please just ask them for a demo, even if you were satisfied with whatever product you're using today, just to see how they could probably put a different spin on that. And as I think Dave mentioned earlier, there's always new things happening in technology with building products and materials, but also in technology for business management. So look at what BQE is offering right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. With that, let's jump to some of these questions in the Q&A. First, just want to say Derek says that you guys are fab. So thank you, Derek. And then let's see. This one I thought was interesting. So Kelly asks, architecture has traditionally been a profession of long hours and a flat yearly salary. How do you think that paying employees overtime would affect project management? In my experience, when a project is profitable, it is regularly the result of the architectural project team working more hours for no additional pay. And because the project is profitable for the firm, they do the same thing on the next project.
Okay, Bo, can I jump in on this thing?
Yeah, please.
This is where firms that have these, exempt employees, and they just say, I don't care if they're working 65 hours a week or worse. It's not affecting my profitability. So I think this person is basically pointing out if they were to attribute a cost to this. Now, that's, by the way, one of the things by default, Core does that. It doesn't care that they are a salaried employee. If they're working 65 hours a week on projects, there's an embedded cost in that. And it may not impact your firm because you're not paying that employee more in their payroll, but it will impact you with employee burnout. There's some other knock-on effects of just driving people to work long hours and not getting compensated for it. So that's one of the things I do like. I mean, there are ways to overcome that. So firms that want to conceal that overtime cost and pretend they're being profitable. But I do like the default method at BQE, which is these all have costs, and you should see them built into your project and understand that they are not as profitable as you think, and you're pretending they are when you are giving people salaries and making them work longer hours.
There are also firms that simply choose to pay overtime. I've had the luxury of working at some of those, even at a salaried high performance level, who say hours are hours and penalize the PMs if they dip into that. So that's another model, is not to just ignore it and pretend it's not there, but to treat it like the reality it is.
Yeah. It does require a much more oversight from the manager to make sure those employees are not just throwing in overtime, though, but that's worthwhile time. So
right,
a bit more oversight. Yeah.
Being a biased high-tech entrepreneur, I would have to say that giving people the right systems that don't force them to do mundane work over and over again. Why should I be looking for the CAD detail that's been drawn 30 times in my firm when it can be stored in a central location, and that information and all sorts of topics exists. So the right systems and that single source of truth around those systems that people can share, that's something that can send people home maybe at a reasonable hour to have dinner with their families.
Yeah. Phil Reed, back in the day, like in the early 2000s, when Phil Reed would give Revit workshops, he said there's an easy way to check if you've implemented correctly. If everyone leaves early on Friday, you've implemented it correctly. If they're not leaving early, then you haven't implemented it correctly yet.
I like that.
Love that.
Cool. Well, it seems like we've
There's-
got.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just going to answer the question, does Acelab have MEP products yet? We do not have them yet. The intention is to have everything eventually. Division by division, we're adding things. It started with just Windows and then Windows and Doors. We're up to, I think, 8 divisions now, but trying to be comprehensive and find everything we can within each division and document it in a standardized way so you can compare apples to apples. So that's a lot of back-end work to get it to that level of fidelity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. We try to give a full product category before, moving on to other product categories so that you really have all the information that you need per product category to be able to make the best decision. All right. Well, it looks like we are at time. So I want to thank everyone so much today for joining us and for participating in our polls, for chiming in the chat. And thank you, Steve, Dave, and Andre for being on today and for all of your really great insights. This was really fun. So appreciate your guys' time. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their Wednesday.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bo.
everybody.
Well, a lot of fun. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.